Welcome back to the lab, my guinea pigs. So you might have noticed across my videos, I do use Linux. And what I want to do for that video is a little bit give you a test of why I think that Linux is awesome for retro computing. And I give you 5 good reasons why Linux is awesome for retro computing. Why Linux is awesome for retro computing, number 5. So let's get that out of the way. The first thing you might ask is I have a ton of Windows applications that I won't be able to run under Linux. False. Actually, there is an emulator for Windows on Linux called Wine that works pretty well. Here you can just trigger the command line. Here I use Hxc Floppy Emulator and just run the Windows application. And Wine takes over, recognize that this is a Windows executable and run it like a normal Windows application. So here this is an example of retro utility I use a lot, to explore floppy disk images and so on. And you can see both all the interface is kind of responsive, and you can explore your drives and there is no issue whatsoever. Cool, you might tell. You can run Windows software under Linux, but what about the hardware that comes with software that runs only under Windows? You can do that too. So for example, my Xgpro, which is a software for my EEPROM programmer, works under Wine, but if you connect the programmer to the USB bus, it actually is able to connect to the device and run it. For example, here I show you with an old 74 LS Logic chip. You can test it, no problem whatsoever. Reason number 4 why Linux is actually awesome for your retro computing. And that's going to be simple. That's all about the community. So let's take, for example, the emulation community. All those programs that can emulate a retro computer on your machine. One of the well-known one is UAE, which is Universal Amiga Emulator. That's just one of those emulators that I use all the time. That works perfectly under Linux. And you can actually even mount your device, your real device. We'll see that a little bit later with the other reasons why to love Linux. And it's pretty well supported. fs-uae is just an interface on top of UAE. Another good example is Mame. I used it a lot also to emulate those arcade cabinet. You do have a native Linux support. It has been there for years, works for millions of platforms. It's super very modular. You can basically build new computer architectures out of Mame. That's how we can emulate all those various cabinets with all those various audio chips or graphic chips and so on. So I could go through a bunch of them, but there is one that is pretty interesting, that is kind of a front end for emulators that use all of them UAE and Mame and so on, and make an interface on top of it, and it's called RetroArch, which is basically was a kind of a distribution for Arch. So even for example, here I am on my Arch machine. You can install it if you try to find it. You see that it is available as a community package. It's based on libretro to interface all those emulators. So that's a kind of you can transform your machine as a dedicated machine to run from simple interfaces all those emulators and games and images. And one kind of evolution of this one, for example, that's a great example on how this community is built. Somebody is building something, an emulator, somebody is building a front end on top of it for this emulator, then a front end for several emulators, and then somebody went like the next stage, which is, for example, Retropie, which are full distributions made from this RetroArch. For Raspberry Pi, for example. So you just buy a Raspberry Pi, you have an image, you copy the image, and you have a full-fledged thing you can plug to your TV, and you can enjoy all your old emulated games. So yeah, that's what I love about Linux with this community, is that you have an entire ecosystem that is built on top of it, and that's like I was showing here, everything is at your fingertips. You have that in distributions, and you can enjoy all those like product of this awesome community working with emulators and tools. Reason number 3 to why you should love Linux for your retro computing is basically all the powerful development tools you have on Linux, and also a huge history of cross-compilation. So when I talk about cross-compilation, I talk about like all the compiler support that you have basically out of the box supported on Linux. Here you have, for example, vasm, which is also in the Arch Linux distribution. If we look at it, you see that's an assembler that can target like 6502, 6800, 6809, ARM, and you name it, basically even Z80 and so on. So even like PDP-11. So you have like those tools that are already in the community packages you can use to compile or to develop with the comfort of your Linux machine, targeting one of your retro computer. So let me show you one like very quickly. That is, I will show you how to compile an Hello World from my own Linux machine targeting the Amiga OS. So let me show you a little example. So here we have an Hello World project basically for Amiga with an hello.c and a quick setup.sh, which is like a shortcut I made to set myself up for this environment. It's just like a bunch of includes and paths. So the hello.c is just an hello world, like a standard C hello world with stdio, and you would just like print a string on the console. So if you try to compile it, so it's a little bit complicated. The command line, you have like a VC, which is a compiler. You target like a 68,000. You have a bunch of includes with the NDK from Amiga and the library associated with them. Then you say like you want an executable named hello and from hello.c, and you target the general like library for Amiga. If you use the command file on that compiled file, it can tell you like, oh, it can recognize that that's an Amiga OS executable, and that's out of the box from Linux. For example, if you go and ask that for an ADF file, it will recognize that's an Amiga DOS disk. So all those commands like file and for example here I will show you how to use xdump, like a kind of a low level xdump for a file. It is out of the box. So here, for example, if we want to dump the head of this workbench.adf, you use xdump-c, which is canonical, the way you usually like it, like with hexadecimal on the left and characters on the right for the ASCII representation. And pipe head, you have these awesome like combination things you can do. So it just shows you the beginning of the file. And so you can examine your file at a low level, and all those commands again are like out of the box on Linux. And now reason 2, why Linux is awesome for retro computing. This is all about low-level control. The Linux kernel is based on Unix, and it has this notion of block devices. So let's see how it looks. You have a command called lsblk. So ls means list. You often you see that for example ls for the files, but lsblk show you all the disk devices that are plugged into your computer. And more on that, it actually shows you where it is mounted if you are currently accessing those block devices at a certain part of your file system. For example, you see my slash that is mounted, my home that is mounted, boot and EFI. So this is a small IDE converter I use to plug my Amiga hard drive, which is a compact flash, and transfer it to like a standard IDE interface. And this is a USB device where you can plug those kind of IDE and hook that up to your USB on your computer. It's pretty standard. It's used in like computer forensics and so on. When I plug it in, and if I come back to my Linux machine, if I redo like lsblk, you can see that this device is showing up with lsblk. So SDA is now this compact flash that was extracted straight from my Amiga with a running workbench. So if I use parted, which is basically asking Linux to read the partition of this device, you have to do like sudo, because you cannot access like the low level devices directly for safety reasons. And if you ask it like, oh, list me the partitions that are in there, check this out. Linux is able to read the file system partition, the partition of the device. And you see that I have two partitions because like the disk is too big for an Amiga, which is DH0 and DH1 that are like Amiga partitions. What else can you do? Let's say you want to image this device. Now, I don't know, I did something awesome in my on my Amiga and I want to save it, for example. What you can do is basically directly image that device exactly like it would be a file. So Linux, when you try to access with cat, for example, a block device, it represents to cat this device as a file. So if I do like cat/dev/sda and I redirect the output to a file, it will create a byte-to-byte image of that physical device in a file. So for example, here I call this image Amiga disk.image. So it's cool, but it is kind of with no feedback. So that's usual under Unix. You have no feedback when something goes well. So it's a little bit long and it's kind of scary because you don't know what is happening. So there is another command called PV, called Progress Viewer, that is exactly like cat. It does the same thing. It reads the file and you can redirect that to a destination, but it can give you some feedback. So here you can see that I jumped cut a little bit. It created this Amiga disk.img. here, like if you use parted on that file instead of this block device, it can read it too. You can have like exactly like you had on the real device. You can do it on the image, and it works exactly the same. And finally, reason number 1 why Linux is awesome for your retro computing. So Linux has a long history of compatibility with those retro computers. It has been ported to the Amiga, or it has been ported to a classic Mac, for example, and it kind of preserved this legacy of compatibility with those old platforms. Let me show you with an Amiga file system. So sudo, you know now the command mount is about mounting a block device on the file systems. -o loop means that I will emulate a block device on top of a file. Basically, I want to mount a file that is a file system on the file system. And I use like a normal workbench disk image in ADF format from Amiga. And I will mount that in the temp directory. So now if I go in this temp directory, and if I list the files, I can actually read the Amiga file system. So you have to realize that this is completely out of the box for a Linux OS. This is part of the kernel that can read the Amiga file system. Let me show you how it's represented when you ask mount what are the file systems that are actually present right now on the machine. So here you see that that's the file workbench.adf, and it's mounted as AFFS, which is Amiga file system. Here, to write a file, I used vim with sudo, and I can actually write into an Amiga file system. How awesome is this? If I want to unmount, I just do umount temp, and now this image, for example, you can use it and, I don't know, burn it on or actually copy it on a real floppy disk. You put that in your Amiga, and you have your test.txt that you could edit in the comfort of your like completely vanilla Linux and read it on the Amiga file system. That I'm not sure that you can do that simply with Windows. Of course, if you were to use, for example, SDA like previously, you could change straight the physical device that you are plugging into your Amiga while mounting your partitions. So my guinea pigs, I hope you liked this video, and please subscribe and like or comment if I missed anything on how Linux is awesome for retro computing. You will find on the description below all the links of all the tools I used. I'll try to not forget one, but if I do, please comment also, and I will add them. Thank you very much, and see you next time.